Random thoughts I have. Hi, how are you? So today I'm going to talk about random thoughts that I have, and because I constantly think about things, and as I'm sure you do too, you have thoughts, and I have thoughts, and people have thoughts throughout their day. I write down my thoughts. I constantly write down my thoughts. So I have stacks of paper where I've just literally written random stuff down that I've thought about, or an interesting thing I heard on a podcast. And as I move the microphone closer, okay. I like to have diversity. Sometimes I have the mic here. Sometimes I like to bring the microphone in and feel like a radio DJ. Anyway, I have stacks of paper just all over the place because I'm constantly writing stuff down. And so I've decided to go through some of those stacks of paper and just find random stuff that I write down or I type on my phone. Just interesting thoughts. Well, I don't know. You can judge whether they're interesting. But I just write down my thoughts. And so I'd like to share with you today some of the random thoughts that I've written down. And this is where my silly thoughts come from that I do on Instagram, is that I just, that's interesting, write it down. And then eventually when I have a stack, I type them so I can, search for them later in a very organized way, because the first rule of success is organization. And so I just write all this stuff, or I type all this stuff, I write, and then I type, and then I present this stuff to you and randomly talk about stuff. Anyway, today I want to talk about coincidences and umbrellas and fun phrases and other stuff. So what I wanted to start out with was, this is a cool podcast called Conan O'Brien. If you're familiar with Conan O'Brien, he's hosted the Oscars a couple times. He did a late night show back in the 90s and early 2000s, and in the 2000 things, I think he was on TBS, but he was on NBC for several years, and he took over David Letterman's spot in 1993, and it was a big deal. And he was like a writer on Saturday Night Live for a long time. And then, Lauren Michaels said, hey, well, why don't we give the show to Conan when Dave decided to retire? And then there was this tryout, and Conan did good, and then he got the show. And so I was listening to, so Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend is a podcast, and there's this other podcast called Inside Conan, where they talk with people who have worked with Conan on the NBC late night show and other shows. And so they interviewed Conan on Inside Conan. They interviewed Conan and his producer, I think, Jeff Ross. And they were talking about how when Conan started, David Letterman, finished off his last show with Bruce Springsteen, and I think Bill Murray was there. And then, that show was over, and they immediately started tearing down the set. And then Conan took over, and then suddenly Conan had to put this show together in 3 or 4 months before he took over David Letterman's spot, who's the highest rated late night talk show host. And there's Conan's turn; it's his turn to take it over, and barely anybody knew who he was. And then of course he turned into this big phenomenon. But anyway, my point is, what I'm getting to is that Conan O'Brien was putting together his show in the summer of 1993, and he didn't have a band. They were putting together the sets, and they were writing all the comedy bits that they were going to do for the first week of the show, but he didn't have a band. And this crazy coincidence happened where Conan had a headache at the studio in NBC, and he went to the NBC studio people, and nobody had any aspirin. And so he walked out of the building to go get some aspirin, and on his way to get some aspirin, he ran into Max Weinberg, who was Bruce Springsteen's former drummer, but then Bruce Springsteen decided to work with other musicians. And so Max was looking for a job, and Conan was looking for a band, and they just happened to coincidentally meet on the street in New York at the same time. And they also interviewed on Inside Conan, they interviewed Max Weinberg about, the exact meeting. And he had just had, a pastrami sandwich with his wife or whatever, and they were walking around town, and Conan was looking for aspirin. They just met. And Conan said, and Max Weinberg only knew Conan because Conan was had been on an interview with Tom Schneider, who was an interviewer at the time, and he knew that Conan was going to take over Letterman, and so he said, "Hey, Conan, congratulations!" And Conan talked to Max. "Hi, I'm Max Weinberg. I used to drum with Bruce Springsteen," and they got to talking, and Max Weinberg ended up auditioning for Conan to be the band leader of Conan's band, and he got the job. And they just randomly, otherwise, if those two people had not met at that particular time, Conan may have had a different band. And it's just, in this crazy world where it looks like it's absolute chaos and we don't know what's going to happen, there are things like that. There are examples of that, of like coincidences that happen that keep me thinking, okay, maybe there's hope. Maybe there are, higher powers and angels looking out for us, because coincidences or, our energies just attract each other. Magical things happen. Sometimes magical things happen. If I've had coincidences happen, you're thinking about a song. I was thinking about that Tears for Fears song, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I had it in I woke up one morning and I was just like thinking about it. And for some reason I wanted to research the lyrics, and I looked it up on Wikipedia, and then I went to the grocery store that morning, and as soon as I walked in the store, there's the song, Tears for Fears, Everybody Rules the World, Wants to Rule the World, playing on the loudspeakers. And coincidences like that. So, okay, that's not as big as a coincidence as Conan and Max, but still, like, you've had coincidences, or deja vu, or just magical things happen. And anyway, I wrote down that thing about, Conan meeting Max Weinberg on a coincidence just because he needed aspirin. If he hadn't had that headache and needed that aspirin, he wouldn't have left the building and run into Max. And so it's just like, there's hope. I think there's hope. Anyway, that's one of the things that I wrote down. Another thing I wrote down on September 18th, 2025, last year at 9:15 a.m. By the way, I usually put the time and date of when I thought about it, and if any radio or podcast was playing in the background, or if there was absolute silence, I put silence. This is how I write down my thought. I put dash, and then I write me, and then I put silence, or I put what I was listening to, and then I put the exact date and that exact time. Because if it's a really magical thought that turns into this big thing one day, I want to know the exact day and time and the circumstance of when I thought of it. Just for fun, and also for copyright reasons, in case there's ever any question about where I came up with the thought. So I wrote this down on September 18th, 2025 at 9:15 a.m. The whole point of everything we do, the whole point of everything we do every minute is to obtain a feeling of joy. That's all. But you can't truly know joy unless you experience non-joy in this world of opposites. So everything we try to do every minute is to obtain joy. And I think that's true. Don't you think that's true? See, I write really deep stuff too. So, we go about our lives. Every second that is going by, I don't want bad stuff. I only want good stuff. I'm searching for joy at every second. But the only way I know joy is if sometimes non-joy things happen. But I would like a majority of joy to happen rather than, maybe 2% non-joy and 98% joy. That's how I would like my life to go. And I want that negative 2% to be really insignificant. I know non-joy. I don't need any more references to it. I know it. So anyway, that's something I wrote down. Phrases. When I hear a podcast or I'm watching a TV show and someone says a phrase or a big word that I don't know, like pejorative, which I still don't know what that means, and I keep thinking that I'm going to look it up one day, but I never do. I don't know what it means, but I've heard several really smart people on podcasts say the word pejorative, and I don't know what it means. But man, it really makes you sound smart when you say it. So hopefully one day I can use it in a sentence and know what the heck I'm talking about. Anyway, I heard somebody say post-haste, the royal we. Someone said sweet. Not sweet, but sweet. Let's haggy means let's haggle or negotiate. Hey, let's haggy. This movie's cast is stacked. Have you used some of these phrases? This is great. I write down these phrases all the time. I'm just writing phrases. I literally have written down pages and pages of interesting phrases and big words, and I've literally typed them. I'm a bonkers person. I like to type and organize things because I was going to do Twitter, and I was going to type really interesting things, and I'm hardly ever on Twitter now. Every once in a while, I type a tweet. Oh, I guess it's X now. Excuse me. But I was going to do a big word every day and stuff like that, but I never get around to this. So that tracks, man. That tracks. I don't know exactly. That makes sense. Is that what that means? Hug it out after an argument. Let's hug it out. Writ large and taciturn. These are things that I've written down. Resting worried face. And you can say that twice. You ever use these phrases? Are these good phrases? There's so many phrases. Phrases are very interesting things. We don't want to sound cliche, and yet we use a lot of cliches because they're readily at our disposal and they fit the situation, and so we say a cliche, a phrase. Well, that's writ large. Or that's what's not ambiguous. What's the word? Unilateral or ubiquitous. That's a wonderful big word. Oh man, that's just ubiquitous, which I think means flows everywhere. I'm not sure. But man, if you used ubiquitous in a sentence, you really sound smart. What else have I written down? Okay, so apparently on the Mark Maron podcast on July 26, 2021 is when I wrote this down. Matt Damon was quoting Steven Soderbergh. The details matter. And I don't know if this information is accurate, but this is what I wrote down. Confusing people does not make you an artist. So if you create a movie that no one really understands, it doesn't mean you're an artist. It means you didn't communicate properly. That's what I took away from that. And I like to keep that in mind. It's when I write, when I do communication with you, I like to be as clear and concise as I possibly can. Well, maybe not concise, but I like to be clear about things, and I like to communicate. And wow, I just got lost in my thoughts. Maybe I should write something down. But I don't like weird art. I don't like coming away from art where it's weird and I don't understand and I'm just confused. Now, that's different than art that makes you think, where you look like, oh, I'm not quite sure what that's about, but that's really interesting. That's different than, yeah, I don't get it. That's a completely different thing. And some people might get it. That's the thing about art. But just because you confuse people doesn't make you an artist, is what I got from that quote by Steven Soderbergh, said by Matt Damon on a Mark Maron podcast. Another podcast thing I heard, and I don't know if this is accurate, but I mean, at 56 minutes into the Smart List podcast with Seth Rogen, I think Seth said that you should nap sitting up so you don't get puffy eyes. Now, if I'm quoting the wrong person, I apologize, but this is what I wrote down. Nap sitting up so you don't get puffy eyes. But why would you get puffy eyes if you lay down? I don't know. Maybe you're squishing your face against the pillow. Oh my God. That reminds me of the time my mother, bless her heart, loved to sew and make quilts, and she made these pillows in the 1970s, but she got this fabric with really cool colors. And so I would sleep on this pillow, and I guess I drooled in my sleep because I would wake up with the wet colors smeared on my face. The colors from the pillow came off onto my face, and I was wondering why is red and orange and yellow all over my face? I don't understand. And then I figured out it was the pillow, and that became a decorative pillow that I never slept on again. But God, that reminded me of that. Okay. Anyway, how do you nap sitting up? I don't understand. So in 2015, sometimes I write down things that I overhear, because I figure if you're in someone's house or you're talking with a friend and you hear them say something interesting and you say, oh man, that would be an interesting line for my character to use in a book, which I have rarely ever, I think maybe I've done once. But if you're walking in public and you overhear someone say something interesting as you're walking down the sidewalk or in a public place, for me, that's fair game. Because I have, I remember my novel, Passion or Pancakes. Oh my God. I think I was in San Francisco and there were some women walking behind me, and one of them says, oh, that's such a Marina girl thing to say. Because I was in the marina and I thought, that's the line. That's a fantastic line. And I went into this restaurant or cafe and I wrote it down. That's such a marina girl thing to say. And I had my character say it in my novel. And I overhear these things and I write them down. And whenever I go to San Francisco, or actually whenever I do have a little notebook that I carry around with me in my coat pocket, I write down interesting things people say that I hear in public. And sometimes they end up in my novels. This is something interesting. I'm so long-winded. I'm so sorry. This is something I heard in 2015. I was at a restaurant and I overheard. I heard someone say, my mother's brother married my dad's sister. And I literally had to sit down one day and draw little stick figures and try to figure out, okay, your mother's brother married your dad's sister. And I don't know exactly what that means. Or if that's an okay thing to do. But I just remember I literally overheard my mother's brother married my dad's sister. And I thought, that's interesting. And I typed it into my phone or wrote it down. But I think, if you say it in public, it's fair game. Overheard someone say in an Instagram video that the vowels in Celine Dion's name are E-I-E-I-O. Like the old McDonald's song, E-I-E-I-O. Celine Dion's, the vowels, E-I-E-I-O. It's just little fascinating stuff that I hear people say, and I'm like, how the heck did you figure that out? It is amazing what people notice, who would even think to look at Celine Dion's name and see the vowel and notice the vowels or count the consonants. And, God, it's just brilliant stuff that's like, oh my God. And here I am, making up silly thoughts about, confetti in a tin foil volcano, which I think is funny. But, some people are just absolutely brilliant. And it's just amazing to me what we can notice. Clouds are sky cotton candy. This is the stuff that I write down. It's nowhere close to E-I-E-I-O. My chiropractor told me once that movement is medicine. I've injured my back on occasion, and it's taken a few weeks or months to get back to normal because I've bruised it or I twisted or something like that. But something my chiropractor told me is the movement is medicine, and if you just lay in bed, it'll stay stiff and you won't get better. So I gotta keep walking because I guess walking gets all the body chemicals going. And so movement is medicine is something I wrote down. I'm probably not going to get through all these. I'll break this into another podcast. But I think today I'll close with umbrellas. And I wrote down that I should get a clip to put on my umbrella that attaches to my backpack. So when I go out, taking my backpack with my umbrella, I don't lose my umbrella. There have been so many times that I've left my umbrella accidentally in the Uber or in a car or in a restaurant. How many times have you forgotten your umbrella? And I really should have a clip that attaches to my belt or my backpack. There was one time, it was like a couple of years ago, I went into the post office. I took an Uber to the post office. And I walk in the post office and I hear someone say, Nathan. And I think, oh my goodness, I'm finally getting recognized. And I turn around and it's my Uber driver handing me my umbrella that I forgot in his Uber. First of all, I'm crushed because I still have yet to be recognized in public. Not that I would. You know. How many viewers do I usually get on YouTube? Not too many. And on Instagram, I get some, and I love you all, and I appreciate everything. But I never get noticed anywhere. Or maybe I do, but people don't really care. The amount of times that I've told people that, yeah, I do an Instagram channel and I do a YouTube, no one cares. There's just like no reaction. So I think everyone does, right? Anyway, the Uber driver's like handing me my umbrella, and I said, thank you so much. Can you imagine? He's the Uber driver. First of all, he had to check in the back seat to see if I left anything, saw the umbrella, stopped the car, turned off the car, got out, ran through the parking lot, made the effort to bring me my umbrella. I mean, I gave him a tip, obviously. And I mean, that was so nice of him to bring me up my umbrella. So many times I've forgotten my umbrella. And that's not something I wrote. Oh, yeah, it is something I wrote down. The time my Uber driver brought me my umbrella. Anyway, those are some thoughts that I've had and have written down. Were they fascinating? Were they worth your time? God, I hope they were worth your time. If you're still listening to this, I really appreciate it. This is basically, you know, I've been doing this YouTube for almost a year now, and this is just a kind of therapy for me. I have all these thoughts, and I have nowhere to put them, and I don't know where they're going to go. Sometimes they go in my books, sometimes they go in my thoughts, and sometimes I just need a place to put them out into the world because you know, a thought that you think that is kind of interesting that just sits on a piece of paper in a shelf or never gets written down. It just seems so sad to me that it's just laying there doing nothing. So maybe that thought can go out into the world and it'll influence you or inspire you or change your life or be mildly interesting and entertaining. So, you know, on the off chance that something random that I think, you know, helps you or inspires you or entertains you, that's great. It's better than that written down thought, just sitting on a shelf doing nothing. So now it's out into the world, and I don't know what it'll do, but I hope it brings a smile to your face at least. Anyway, thanks for listening to me, and I will talk to you again next week with more interesting things to say. Anyway, bye. And I hope you don't forget your umbrella. And stay hopeful for coincidences. Magic does happen. Yeah. Have a great week.